In the lull following the Telephus episode, as the Greek commanders reprovisioned and tended their wounded, Machaon received an unexpected invitation. Nestor, the sage of Pylos, had taken a shine to the young healer and saw in him not just a valuable ally, but almost a surrogate son. One evening, as the fleet harbored off the coast of the Peloponnesus for final preparations, Nestor approached Machaon with a conspiratorial twinkle in his eye. "My boy," Nestor began, "there's someone I'd like you to meet. We've a brief respite now before the final push to Troy, and we're near land I know well, Messenia. Will you indulge an old man and accompany me to the court of King Diocles in Pherae? He's an ally and he has a daughter about your age." Nestor gave Machaon a wink. Machaon blinked in surprise. Amidst war preparations, the last thing on his mind was courtly visits or thoughts of marriage. He stammered polite objections. The fleet might need him, the timetable was tight, but Nestor waved them off. "Agamemnon can spare you for a day or two. The winds aren't entirely favorable yet. Our High King is busy sacrificing to whichever gods he thinks will speed us along," Nestor said with a kindly smile. "Besides," Nestor continued more softly, "you've seen how fragile life is. If you have a chance for a bit of joy, even fleeting, you should seize it. Healing isn't only about staving off death, my dear Machaon. It's also about embracing life." Thus it was that Machaon found himself traveling overland in a small convoy with Nestor to Pherae, a pleasant town nestled in the green Messenian hills. The trip felt surreal, a gentle detour into normalcy against the backdrop of war. Nestor regaled him with tales of his own youth, some of which Machaon suspected were embellished, but he listened with a smile. As they neared Diocles' palace, Machaon's stomach fluttered with nerves. He realized he hadn't thought about romance or marriage at all since leaving home. His mind had been wholly on healing and battle. What if he was terrible at the formalities of courtship? Podalirius would surely tease him mercilessly if he returned with tales of blushing before a princess. "Relax," Nestor chuckled, noticing Machaon's fidgeting. "You faced armed men and angry gods. You can handle one young lady." They arrived to a warm welcome. King Diocles of Pherae proved to be a gracious host, a sturdy middle-aged man who greeted Nestor as an old comrade. They'd fought side by side in a campaign long ago, and welcomed Machaon with particular enthusiasm. "The healer of Telephus! Word reached us swiftly," Diocles boomed, pumping Machaon's hand. "Any friend of wise Nestor's is a friend of ours. Come, you must meet my pride and joy." He clapped and called, "Anticleia, my dear!" From a shaded portico, a figure emerged, and Machaon's world tilted. Anticleia of Pherae was, in a word, radiant. Not merely for her beauty, though she was lovely, with dark hair pinned up in braids and intelligent amber eyes, but for an air of vitality that surrounded her. She approached with a measured grace and a curious smile. Machaon, suddenly tongue-tied, managed a respectful bow. "King Diocles' daughter," he murmured, immediately cursing himself for stating the obvious. Anticleia giggled softly, melting any stiffness in the air. "I see father has neglected introductions. I am Anticleia," she said, offering her hand in greeting. "And you must be the famous Machaon, whose exploits my father cannot stop praising." Machaon gently took her hand. He noticed a tiny ink stain on her fingers. Perhaps she had been writing or painting before being summoned. It made him smile. "I fear the king exaggerates. I'm just a physician doing my duty," he replied. Anticleia's eyes sparkled. In times like these, a physician's duty is more heroic than ever. Healing a wound, no one else could. That sounds like a tale from the epics. Telephus and the healer has a ring to it, doesn't it? She was teasing him lightly, but with genuine admiration behind it. Machaon felt warmth flood his face, and was grateful Nestor interjected then with a jovial remark to give him a moment to collect himself. Over the next day, as the Greek fleet waited offshore for the final muster, Machaon enjoyed a brief idyll in Pherae that felt plucked from a sweeter dream. King Diocles held a banquet in Nestor's and Machaon's honor. Between courses of roasted lamb and honey cakes, Diocles made sure Machaon was seated next to Anticlea. They conversed easily. He found her witty and learned and extraordinarily kind. She was fascinated by his upbringing in a family of healers and laughed merrily at his anecdotes of childhood pranks. In turn, Anticlea shared how she often helped care for Phares' sick alongside the priests of Apollo, a princess who rolled up her sleeves to tend the ill, earning her people's quiet adoration. Machaon was struck by how familiar her heart seemed, gentle like Epione's, yet spirited like Hygeia's. Here, far from the din of armies, he felt at peace and holy himself. Their connection deepened swiftly, as wartime romances often do when tomorrow is uncertain. On the second day, Anticlea gave Machaon a tour of the palace gardens. Under a pergola heavy with grapevines, they spoke of hopes and fears. Anticlea admitted softly that she dreaded the war. She had two older brothers, Crethon and Orsilochus, who had also joined the Achaean expedition and sailed off to fight. "Promise me, when you're out there, you'll look after yourself as much as you look after others," she implored, placing a hand on his arm. Machaon's heart flipped at her genuine concern. "I promise to try," he said gently. "Though I suspect I'm better at mending others than minding my own bumps and bruises." Anticlea smiled. "Then promise you'll come back here and let me tend to any bumps and bruises once this all ends." Her cheeks flushed at her own boldness, but she held his gaze. Machaon felt an overwhelming surge of tenderness. "I promise," he whispered, and before he knew it, he had drawn her into his arms. In that secluded, sun-dappled corner of the garden, he and Anticlea shared a sweet, earnest kiss, the kind that seals promises and starts legends of its own. By that evening, King Diocles and Nestor were in private cahoots, delighted at the blossoming love. Nestor wryly commented to Machaon, "It seems you found a cure for loneliness even Asclepius didn't teach you." Heartened by the prospect of joy amid war's darkness, the elders quickly arranged what might normally have been a months-long courtship into a hastily planned marriage. After all, the fleet would leave imminently. Who knew when, if, Machaon would return alive? Life had to be grasped in the moment. Machaon and Anticlea readily agreed. Their union felt not rushed, but fated, as though two rivers long running parallel had finally converged. And so, in a small temple of Apollo at Phares, Machaon wed Anticlea in a ceremony that was intimate and poignant. The twilight sky burned gold as they exchanged simple vows before the gods. Anticlea's hands trembled slightly in Machaon's as she pledged to Hera and Zeus that she would be a faithful wife. Machaon vowed to Apollo, Asclepius, and Artemis that he would cherish and protect Anticlea with all my heart for all my days. There was no lavish feast or time for elaborate rites, just a handful of family and friends bearing witness. Nestor gave the bride away on Diocles' behalf, tears in the old warrior's eyes. But the simplicity made it more profound. When they shared the ceremonial cup of wine, Machaon realized this happiness was as intense in its own way as the battlefield adrenaline he'd felt, but warm and gentle, not fierce. It grounded him. They spent one blissful night together as husband and wife. In the quiet of the royal guest chamber, Anticlea rested her head on Machaon's chest, tracing the scars he'd earned. One from a boar's tusk in his youth, another small one from a training mishap, and listening to his heartbeat. They whispered about the future, daring to dream beyond the war. Anticlea spoke of possibly establishing a great healing temple one day, perhaps in Phares or back in Tricca, where they could teach others the medical arts after the war. Machaon imagined little children with his steady hands and her bright eyes running around an herb garden. "We'll have to name one Asclepius," To make father's spirit chuckle, he joked softly. Anticlea blushed and admitted she hoped to soon have reason to choose baby names. In that tender moment, Machaon realized she was not just speaking idly, she might already suspect a new life taking root. The possibility filled him with a fierce, protective joy. He placed a hand over her belly and whispered a prayer to Apollo's son, his own father, to watch over them, all three, if the fates so blessed them. Too soon, dawn's first light crept in. Duty called louder than love in that age of heroes. Machaon readied himself to depart and rejoin the fleet. Anticlea was brave as they said farewell at the palace gates, though tears glittered in her eyes. She pressed into his hand a wrapped object, a parting gift. "For you, my husband, to aid you in your work and remind you of home," she said. Machaon unwrapped it to find a bronze scalpel, exquisitely crafted, with an ebony handle engraved in intertwining patterns of a serpent and a flowering olive branch. It was a thing of beauty and precision, clearly made by the finest smith in Messenia. On the blade was etched a tiny phrase in Greek: "To heal and to hope." Machaon was struck speechless. He recognized Anticlea's hand in the design. The symbols combined their worlds, the serpent of Asclepius and the olive of peace. Overcome, he embraced her, inhaling the scent of jasmine in her hair to etch it into memory. "I will carry this always, and by it I shall carry you with me in all I do," he vowed thickly. Anticlea finally let the tears fall, but she smiled. "Come back to me, Machaon. Come back to us," she whispered, resting a hand over her abdomen ever so subtly. Machaon understood. "I will," he promised, voice fierce with emotion. One last kiss, filled with the sweetness of new marriage and the ache of imminent separation. And he tore himself away to follow Nestor's escort back to the ships. As the Greek fleet set sail from Messenia's shores, now truly bound for Troy at last, Machaon stood on the stern of his ship, gazing back at the dwindling outline of the green hills. Anticlea would be there, perhaps watching until his sail vanished beyond the horizon. He pressed the engraved scalpel to his heart. In that moment, he felt a curious duality. He was both the healer warrior off to face the world's greatest conflict and a husband and father-to-be, tethered to a future beyond the war. The thought gave him strength. Let others charge into battle for glory or vengeance. Machaon would go with love as his guiding light through the storm. He silently swore to all the gods who would listen that he would survive this war and return to her side. For now, as the Greek fleet cut through the waves toward Troy, Machaon touched the serpent and olive motif on the scalpel and allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. Buoyed by the warmth of love and armed with the skill of his craft, he was ready to meet whatever fate the war would bring, and to survive it for the sake of the life awaiting him on the other side. At long last, the fabled walls of Troy rose on the horizon. The Greek fleet approached the Trojan shore as dawn broke, painting the eastern sky blood orange behind the city's high battlements. A nervous energy rippled through the men on deck. After so many false starts and detours, this was truly it, the end of the voyage and the beginning of the war's true test. Machaon stood among the forward ships, his eyes on the distant strand where enemy forces could already be seen mustering. He absent-mindedly thumbed the engraved scalpel sheathed at his belt, Anticlea's gift, feeling the serpent motif under his fingers. The familiar touch steadied him. Nearby, Achilles was cinching on his helmet, the horsehair plume quivering with anticipation. Odysseus flexed the limbs of his bow. Agamemnon paced on his flagship's prow, shouting final orders. From Troy's walls, faint horns sounded. The Trojans had spotted their invaders and were rousing to defense. The landing would not be uncontested. As the Greek galleys rode into the shallow, a dark cloud of Trojan arrows arced out from the beach. The first volley rattled against wooden hulls and clattered off raised shields. "Shields up! On my mark, jump and charge!" bellowed Agamemnon, his voice carrying over the crash of the surf. Machaon's heart thumped. He had armed himself lightly, a small round buckler on his left arm and his curved blade in his right hand, knowing his primary duty would not be a frontal assault. Still, he steeled himself. He might have to fight simply to reach the wounded once things grew heated. With a mighty collective cry, the Greeks drove their ships onto Trojan soil. The keels ground against sand, gangplanks splashed down. Protesilaus of Philippi, fated to be the first Achaean to fall, leapt off his ship and was indeed the first to set foot on the beach, only to be immediately skewered by a Trojan spear. His body hit the sand even as dozens more Greeks splashed ashore around it. A savage melee erupted along the tide line. The Trojans, led by Prince Hector and other valiant defenders, rushed to push the Greeks back into the surf. The Greeks, each keen to gain glory as the first to breach Trojan land, charged with ferocity. Machaon landed in the second wave, just behind a bristling wall of shields held by Ajax's men. Arrows hissed past his ears or thunked into the sand at his feet. Ahead, the beach was already a chaos of clashing bronze and thrashing horses. He gripped his scythe blade in one hand and splashed forward through the surf. A Trojan soldier came barreling at him with sword raised. Instinctively, Machaon raised his own weapon and caught the downswing on the wooden shaft of his scythe, deflecting the blow with a jarring thud. Before the Trojan could recover, a Greek ally crashed in and dispatched the man with a spear thrust. Machaon exhaled shakily. A split second slower, and he might have been cut down. But there was no time to dwell. All around him, the cries of the injured began rising above the battle's din. Just a few paces ahead, a young Greek warrior staggered and went down, an arrow protruding from the base of his neck. Without hesitation, Machaon lunged forward and dragged the writhing man behind the shelter of a beached skiff. The wounded soldier was clawing at the shaft lodged near his collarbone, blood bubbling at his lips, likely a punctured lung. Machaon knew he couldn't fully treat this here, but he could stabilize it. In a swift motion, he snapped the arrow shaft short, leaving the arrowhead in place. Then he reached into his pouch, fingers closing around a wad of dried sea moss they had prepared. A spongy algae that would swell and stanch bleeding. He packed it tightly around the embedded arrowhead and pressed the soldier's own trembling hand over it. "Keep pressure here, hard," he instructed. Two other Greeks crouching nearby nodded and took over, carrying their wounded comrade out of the fray. "Get him to the surgeon's tent," Machaon yelled after them, though as yet no such tent existed, only a plan for one once the beach was secure. Still, they understood and bore the injured man toward the surf and the ships. By now, the beach was a patchwork of skirmishes. Clusters of Greeks broke through Trojan lines in places, gaining a few yards of sand, only to be driven back by mounted warriors or reinforcements from the city gates. Achilles cut a swath toward those gates, seemingly invincible as Trojan fighters fell away from him. Menelaus and Odysseus fought back-to-back on another flank. Machaon saw King Nestor get thrown from his chariot by a crashing wave, the old man struggling to his feet in the surf. Machaon sprinted over and managed to fend off a Trojan swordsman with a few deft parries until Nestor's guards rushed in and speared the attacker. Nestor gave Machaon a quick nod of gratitude and shooed him off. "Go, do what you do best. I'm fine." Even in battle, Nestor trusted that Machaon's highest purpose was not guarding him, but saving others. After a brutal hour of bloodletting, the Greeks at last gained the upper hand through sheer resolve and numbers. At Hector's order, the Trojans fell back to their second line of defense nearer the city walls. The beach was secured, strewn with fallen warriors on both sides, crimson waves lapping at their feet. A great cheer went up from the Greeks as they realized they held firm ground in Troy at last. But for Machaon, the work was only beginning. He and Podalirius immediately organized a triage area behind a rise of dunes. Using ship sails as makeshift tents, they established a field hospital on the spot. The wounded poured in, groaning hoplites with arrow-studded limbs, spearmen clutching gut wounds, archers blinded by slashes across their faces. The smell of blood, sweat, and fear hung thick. Machaon rolled up his sleeves, already spattered with gore, and moved from one patient to the next with focused urgency. You'll live. You. Keep pressure here. Drink this. It will dull the pain, he told each in turn, offering a cup of diluted wine laced with poppy to one man and directing another to hold a bandage firm. He sutured gaping cuts, extracted a few shallow arrows with swift yanks, followed by cleansing douses of wine, and even popped a dislocated shoulder back into its socket with a deft pull that made the owner howl and then sigh with relief. Amid the flurry, his humor occasionally flashed. To a burly warrior bemoaning a mere arrow through his earlobe, Machaon quipped, "That ear's not where your sword arm is. Consider yourself lucky. You'll have a fine scar to impress the girls back home." The man managed a bloody grin as Machaon bandaged his ear. In darker moments, Machaon offered comfort, a hand squeeze, a murmured, "Rest. You're in the hands of Apollo's kin. No dark journeys today." Those conscious enough to recognize him took heart at having the famed healer minister to them. Not all could be saved. Machaon soon faced gut-wrenching triage decisions. A young spearman whose belly had been torn open sobbed for help. But his intestines were perforated beyond repair in this crude setting. Machaon knelt by him, giving him opium in wine to ease his passing when he realized surgery was futile. He stayed with the lad until his pain receded and Hades's mercy came. Only then did Machaon move on, jaw clenched, eyes moist, but resolute. Podalirius watched his brother with admiration and pity, knowing how such moments scar the soul. "We can't save them all, brother," Podalirius said softly as they crossed paths. "No, but by the gods, I'll save all that I can," Machaon replied, voice steely. One case nearly broke him, a familiar figure borne in on a stretcher, his foot black and swollen with a foul stench preceding it. Philoctetes, the great archer, was writhing, teeth chattering from fever. He had been bitten by a venomous snake on a tiny island stopover, some say on sacred Chryse, before the landing, an ill omen that had become a medical crisis. The bite on his foot festered horribly. The flesh was necrotic, sloughing off, and the odor was overpowering. Philoctetes' cries had become incessant wails, scaring the troops and twisting the hearts of all who heard. Machaon had tried to treat him aboard ship, applying poultices of crushed herbs, even a rudimentary tourniquet. But the venom was too potent, and infection had sunk deep. Now, on land, Philoctetes' condition was worse. The other leaders clustered around, distraught. This was the bearer of Heracles' bow, a key warrior they could ill afford to lose or leave behind. Yet the odor was overpowering, and Philoctetes howled like a man possessed, demoralizing everyone. Machaon examined the wound again, though he knew it was beyond curing with their current means. The flesh around the bite was black and putrid, the poison having destroyed tissue and invited rampant infection. He could try cutting away the rot, but without effective anesthetic or guarantee of stopping the spread, it might just prolong the suffering. Philoctetes seized Machaon's arm with surprising strength, his eyes wild. "Please, end it or cure it," he rasped. "This agony, I cannot—" His voice broke into a sob. Machaon felt a lump in his throat. He had seen wounds and disease, but rarely the pure torment written on a man's face as it was on Philoctetes now. Swallowing his pride and sorrow, Machaon made the hardest recommendation of his life thus far. "We cannot heal this with what we have here," he said quietly to the gathered kings. "The venom, perhaps from a sacred snake, defies our remedies. The best I can do is give him opium to sleep, but the foot, it will continue to rot. He cannot walk or fight." The implication hung in the salt air. Odysseus nodded grimly, already thinking ahead. "We can't carry him into every battle, but we cannot kill him either. He's our comrade." "Leave me," Philoctetes groaned, having overheard. "Leave me on some shore to die. Spare me the shame, and spare yourselves the burden." His words were bitter, tears streaming down his face, not just from pain, but from the despair of being cast out. In the end, a sorrowful decision was made. They would leave Philoctetes behind on Lemnos, the nearest desolate isle, with ample supplies and hopes that perhaps he might recover enough to be retrieved later. This task fell to Odysseus and a small crew. They ferried Philoctetes away from the main camp that evening. When Odysseus came to lead him off, Philoctetes spat through his pain, cursing the Greeks for their abandonment. Machaon stepped forward to offer one last bit of care. He pressed into Philoctetes' trembling hand a little pouch of herbs and a water skin of willow bark tea. "For the pain, and to clean the wound as you can," he said softly. Philoctetes fixed him with a bloodshot gaze. "You tried, son of Asclepius. I know you tried," he panted. Then a sudden spasm of agony racked him and he screamed, nearly collapsing. As Odysseus' men bore Philoctetes away, Machaon felt a wave of failure crash over him. He had lost this patient, not to death, but to suffering beyond his capacity to heal. It was humbling and haunting. He prayed under his breath to Apollo that this not be the end of Philoctetes' story. Indeed, it would not be, but that is for later tales. Achilles laid a sympathetic hand on Machaon's shoulder. "Some wounds are not within any mortal's power," he offered quietly. Machaon could only nod, trying to bury the self-doubt gnawing at him. Even a healer blessed by a god must face limits. The lesson stung, but he took it to heart. As dusk settled on the first day at Troy, the Greeks fortified their beachhead and lit campfires in long rows along the sand. Troy's gates remained closed for now. The day's skirmish had shown the defenders that the invaders were formidable, and a longer siege loomed. In the flickering firelight, Machaon moved among rows of pallets where the day's injured lay resting. He checked dressings, adjusted splints, murmured encouragement. The men already revered him. Whispers of "the healer at war" passed lips as they recounted how he'd saved so-and-so from bleeding out, or how he stood unflinching in arrow fire to tend a fallen friend. Machaon paid little heed to accolades. He was too consumed with the next tasks. With Podalirius' help, he set up a rotation of medics and even trained a few quick-learning soldiers as aides, thereby founding what might be considered one of the first field hospitals in recorded history. They erected a tent from a ship's sail, emblazoned with the serpent and staff symbol, so all would know where to bring the wounded. Even some injured Trojan prisoners were treated there. Machaon would not refuse them, a fact that earned him puzzled gratitude from those enemies and, from a few hardliners among the Greeks, a bit of scorn. But he recalled his oath in the temple at Tricca, and he would not break it here at Troy. He would heal whomever he could. Late that night, when most were sleeping or on sentry duty, Machaon finally allowed himself a moment's respite. He wandered a few paces beyond the camp to the edge of the surf. The Aegean waters licked at his boots, washing away bloodstains in the sand. Out on the dark sea, the silhouettes of the Greek ships bobbed gently, tied in a makeshift harbor line. Over the plain in the distance, Troy's proud citadel was outlined by torchlights on its ramparts. The war was truly begun now, and it would be long and arduous, he knew. Machaon's heart felt heavy with the weight of the day. The men he saved, the ones he lost, the enormity of what lay ahead. He thought of Anticlea, her face vivid in his mind, and wondered if she was gazing at the same moon, praying for his safety. He touched the scalpel at his side and felt a renewed determination. He would survive this war and return to her. As he stood amid the wounded and weary on the shore of Troy, Machaon raised his eyes to the heavens. The night sky was clear, and high above, the constellation of the serpent-holder glimmered, Asclepius watching over him. A gentle breeze from the sea cooled his face, carrying with it the faintest whisper, as if from his father's spirit. "Be brave, my son." In that moment, Machaon allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. The healer was at war, but he was not alone. The gods, his family, his love, all bolstered him. He glanced once more toward Troy's looming outline. The long siege and many trials awaited beyond those walls. Battles that would test his skill and soul, friendships that would be forged and broken, even the lurking shadow of one young enemy prince whose life he had saved, fated to cross paths with him again in tragedy. All that lay ahead, unknown. For now, he took a deep breath of the salt-tinged air and stepped back toward the glow of the campfires, where groans and snores of injured men created a lullaby of a different sort. This was his world now, not the pristine halls of Tricca's temple, but blood-soaked sands under foreign stars. And yet, in this grim place, he would uphold the light of healing bestowed by Asclepius. Thus ended the second chapter of Machaon's tale, not in triumph or defeat, but in steadfast resolve. He had answered the call to arms with reluctance, turned to courage, formed bonds with heroes, and saved lives through wit and mercy, found love and a reason to outlast the war's horrors. Standing on the shores of Ilion, Machaon felt both the burden and the honor of his destiny. The healer at war gazed toward the long years of conflict to come, years in which he would mend torn flesh and perhaps torn spirits until fate's final test. But that story lies ahead, on the plains of Troy, under the shadow of its impenetrable walls, and shall be told in due time. For now, Machaon, son of Asclepius, squared his shoulders and walked back into the camp of the wounded, the serpent and staff standard casting a long shadow in the firelight. He was ready to serve humanity amid the darkest of wars, with compassion and courage unbroken. A true physician hero, guided by the oath in his heart as unerring as the North Star.